Hey, welcome back to our series on millennial mental health issues on the rise. I'm Scott Treese, a mental health professional and ADHD career coach where I've spent over 15 years helping young adults become happier, healthier, and really start to move on with their life. But today, we're going to be looking at the loneliness epidemic that is exacerbated, if not caused by social anxiety in our current world. And millennials are often referred to as the anxious generation, with over 12% diagnosed with some sort of anxiety disorder. But equally, I think we could be known as the lonely generation, because recent studies have really shown that up to 65% of millennials report being lonely. And these trends aren't looking any better for Gen Z either, with a 71% lonely rate. And young adults are more lonely than any other generation. And I even think of older generations who've already lost many friends and family members. Young adults are still promoting and saying that they're more lonely than that generation. Loneliness, which we'll learn is fueled by social anxiety more than any other mental health issue, has terrible consequences. I mean, we literally see that loneliness kills us because if you think about it, we are social creatures and social connection is a biological need. It's vital to well-being. For example, if you see babies without human contact, they often don't live. Isolation is what we use for torture, and I thought this was funny, but research shows that loneliness is compared to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. And if we think about loneliness, we really see that it makes us struggle in every other realm of life. Essentially, I think making everything harder, right? Lonely parents struggle more. Loneliness exacerbates our health issues. We're far less likely to seek treatment. It exacerbates mental health disorders. We see cognitive decline, right? It just makes everything harder. And loneliness also costs us a ton of money, as well as productivity, due to being disengaged. For example, lonely people miss up to 2 more weeks than their non-lonely counterparts. I mean, that adds up to $406 billion a year in the United States alone. So we know the loneliness epidemic is well documented. And you're probably aware of the public health issues and ramifications around suicide or overdose. And there's probably a good chance that you've experienced loneliness as well. So where does social anxiety fit into this? Because social anxiety is a unique predictor. I mean, far more than depression or general anxiety or any other mental health issue. And social anxiety's link with loneliness is also bidirectional, meaning they feed into each other, right? The more lonely you are, the more social anxious you might become, and the more social anxious you are, the more lonely you may become. So let's do a quick overview of what social anxiety is. We're going to be using the DSM-5, and their updated language is going to be calling this social phobia disorder. And that's what you would actually be diagnosed with. And there's several criteria that we're going to go through pretty quickly. But the first and foremost is there is a fear of social situations, right? There's that anxiety where you're going to be exposed to some sort of level of scrutiny, right? Where you're being examined or judged. And so maybe that's like meeting new people, eating in front of other people, a job interview. So you're anxious about the situation, and then you become hyper self-conscious. So you're afraid that you're going to act in a way where you're going to actually show some of those anxious or awkward type situations that are going to essentially be negatively evaluated. For example, I remember recently riding in a car with someone, and that could be anybody, a brother or a friend, and I'm starting to become conscious of the way that I should be, like how much eye contact should I be making, right? Am I supposed to only be looking at the road? Am I supposed to be glancing? And so I become worried that I'm not making the right amount of eye contact. And then I'm afraid that I'm going to be embarrassed or dejected or offend someone. So we become hyper aware of our own self and how that's going to be interpreted in the social situation. And these fears, and this is important too, these fears cause us to then start to avoid some of that interaction, right? We're withdrawing or disengaging. And this is often, and especially in psychotherapy, called safety behavior, where we're really only seeking comfort, right? I remember pretending to be on the phone when I was on the train into work and wanted to sort of avoid an awkward social situation. And if we're not withdrawing and if we're not disengaging and we are experiencing this social scrutiny, we're experiencing that with an immense amount of anxiety, right? It's awful of that experience. And this is anxiety. So this is the other criteria, is that this anxiety is out of proportional to the actual threat. Essentially that it's irrational, right? Even though our body and our mind, like, it feels like we're in an awful situation, our fight, flight, or freeze response, right? Our fear response is kicking, but we're not in actual danger, right? Like, we're just in a job interview. And so, yes, it's important, but again, it's not life threatening, but your body and your mind is responding like it is. The fifth criteria, it's persistent. So this anxiety is going to be, and patterns around it, is going to be lasting more than 6 months. The sixth criteria is it's crucial, and this is crucial for diagnosis, is that it's causing some sort of impairment or dysfunction at home, work, school, etc., right? So it's actually harming you and holding you back in your life. For example, I think of the amount of freshmen that I've worked, right? It's their first year of college, and they're just sitting alone in their dorm. And their social anxiety is only, right, every day that goes by, it only gets worse and worse and worse. So then they stop going to class, and then they don't show up for tests. And then lo and behold, they probably have to withdraw or drop out for that semester. Or I think about, several young men that I've worked with where time after time, they're just agonizing, right? They're wanting to reach out. They're wanting to make a friend. They're wanting to follow up, and they're just in their room ruminating over what they should say, right? Agonizing over and over and over. How is this going to be interpreted? What should I say? And so what they ultimately do is then not send it at all. And so they just continue to be lonely and not really reaching out or staying connected. And then the seventh criteria is, and this is where we start to have to do what's called a rule out. This is basically saying we know it's not due to drugs or another mental health issue, right? So I think about this as, like, let's say, for example, every single time you get high, you get super socially anxious. Was that social anxiety disorder, or is that, an anxious induced response to THC? So that's something that you'll have to sort of suss out as well. So for the onset of social anxiety disorder, most of it happens in that late teens or early 20s. But I think here our question is, what about for those who develop it into their 20s or 30s or 40s? And the onset usually emerges after some sort of incredibly stressful or humiliating event. Right, I think about if you've ever experienced friend loss, where you're just completely ghosted or rejected and someone cuts you off. Maybe there was a bully at work or somewhere else, or if you've ever been betrayed, or you just bombed a presentation, right? So there's some sort of humiliating and very stressful event. I also see that in adults, it's often maybe centered around a role change, right? So maybe you became a parent well before the rest of your friends did, and they just, like, you felt like they couldn't understand you. Or let's say that you make a lot more money than everyone else around you, right? Or the other way, that everyone else makes a lot more money, and you're starting to feel alienated in that. So kind of your role or social economic status, right? Something is disrupted. I think this is interesting too, is let's say a person who, like a teen or 20-something, they had a lot of social anxiety, especially around dating. Well, when they married, maybe that went away or diminished, but by the time they actually are in their 30s or 40s and they get a divorce, you might see that full-fledged of the social anxiety kind of rear back up. So social anxiety, like all mental health issues, is of course caused by nature and nurture. right? It's heritable. You can see that a first degree relative, you're more likely 2 to 6 more times to develop social anxiety disorder. Maybe it's in our personality, if it's rejection sensitivity or behavior inhibition. Certainly I think there's early childhood experiences, attachment styles, right? All these sorts of things contribute to that. But over the decades, we've seen that social anxiety has been increasing a lot. We see a cultural or environmental phenomenon. So let's start with the awkwardness of what's contributing to some of the social anxiety and loneliness. And I thought about not talking about this first one just because it is strange and to put it out there, but I think we have to. And here it goes. It's porn, Tinder, and the dehumanization of people. First of all, it's the crap we consume only is going to be jacking with our ability to see people as people. Right? Obviously, we are, only looking at parts of someone or kind of this commoditization of a human. And honestly, I don't want to pick on online dating in this video, but again, the dehumanization and this skewed rejection to success ratio, right? Where we're just saying, hey, you're not tall enough, boom, not even going to give you a chance. Well, judging off of 3 to 4 profile pictures, or maybe they try to make a joke in the thing and it didn't come across, right? So essentially it's like we're online shopping for shoes. We're just scrolling, except what does that do for us as we start to see people? Certainly, I think they distort our expectations, but I also think they make us, again, back to this hyper self-conscious and hypercritical. And all of this is essentially fueled by our hyper digital to physical world, right? It's easy to pick on how social media distorts our minds, identities, and relationships, right? Our toxic comparison culture, right? Everyone is skinny, rich, and productive. It makes us super self-conscious about where we are. It's also weird how the onlineness has increased polarization, where we all get somewhat siloed to the algorithms, right? If you read someone post, if you voted for blank, right? Trump or Biden or, whoever it was, defriend me. But then you see them at a social gathering. And how are you supposed to interact there? Right? We become hyper aware of what we're saying. We start to second guess what other people mean. And essentially it really starts to just fuel some paranoia. Plus, right, the whole FOMO, fear of missing out, where, if we weren't invited to something or if we missed out on something, maybe we never even found out about it, but it certainly wasn't in our face. And we're directly in real time realize like, oh, my friend group or this crew is doing this thing. That was my idea and they didn't even invite me, right? Just like that awfulness of an experience, we have instant access to. Essentially, my hunch is growing up with screens hasn't exactly been good for our social health. Even though it's been convenient, our relationships have seemed to have dwindled throughout this process. And this newer trend I'm seeing in my counseling practice is that people are increasingly anxious and self-conscious about offending someone else. Right? These questions are like, am I addressing this person correctly? Am I assuming something? And I think our rapid culture shifts, which in so many ways have been positive and helpful, they also have a second guessing, all of our customs and interactions. For example, I stopped shaking hands during the COVID pandemic. And never have I ever ruminated so much on people's preferences after that experience. And even now I'm like, am I supposed to shake your hand, or are we doing a fist bump, or am I not supposed to touch you at all? Is it rude if I initiate that? So there's just these questions that, what used to be very predictable and knowable are no longer. These anxieties make us not even want to interact with people. Right? If it takes 45 minutes of overthinking of how I should respond to someone, I'm either going to have a panic attack or I'm going to get overwhelmed, shut down, and just avoid the interaction. Another factor, and I'm not judging the morality or the legality of marijuana. I'm in Colorado, but cannabis is really shown to increase self-isolating behavior, while prolonged problem use of cannabis actually increases anxiety. And what's considered problematic? Well, it starts out as helpful, right? So it's fun, or maybe it makes you feel less anxious or more social, and we start to then end up overthinking and alone. And especially problematic behavior is when we start to prioritize getting high by ourselves rather than being social with other people. And I've talked with many people who would never get drunk by themselves, right? They say it seems depressing, but would much prefer and much more inclined to get high by themselves. And worse is that even being social in that they start to get really paranoid and anxious in that situation. Another study came out last year that showed that 42% of young adults use cannabis in 2023. I mean, this is obviously unprecedented generationally speaking. So, even though we don't fully know what THC or cannabis's impact is, certainly I think we're starting to feel some rumbles, and it's not always great. Millennials, we live in the age of comfort. Right, everything is heating and air conditioning. There's carpet. We have not really experienced any sort of major wars. We've had a very easy life in so many ways due to technology. And where this really contributes to social anxiety and loneliness is that our own self-soothing, self-preservation, and safety behavior. What do I mean by that? Culturally and individually, we have tons of coping strategies. And unfortunately, much of our coping actually worsens our situation. I mean, can you imagine being alone by yourself in your house just for a few days with limited or no interaction with the outside world? I mean, realistically, think about it. Like, how many hours of movies or podcasts, audiobooks, music would you actually be consuming, right? We never actually experience solitude or silence. And now imagine being alone with a power outage for 3 days, right? This is a very different experience because we never truly let ourselves be fully alone. And the reality is, for millennials and Zoomers alike, we go days or weeks or more without really any meaningful interaction. And we're just placated by the placebo of our digital world. And so we avoid feeling anxious, and we start to avoid social situations. So we start to neglect our relationships, and we start to soothe our own self, which results in actually a more deepened type of loneliness. Right? Think about it as eating empty carbs, if you will. Right? So there's a bag of Cheetos. It tastes yummy and it tastes like food, but it actually has nothing really in it besides calories to really satiate ourselves. So a lot of our behavior feels like interaction. It feels like connections, but it's not anything actual having relational depth to it. Okay, so now let's talk about a game plan for developing relationships and overcoming some of the social anxiety. And ultimately, what I'm going to really argue is that the only way out is through. Because, of course, you already know that you want to develop relationships, right? These are universally cherished. So you need others, you want to have friends, you create bonds, have intimate relationships. But that means you're going to have to put yourself out there, right? You're going to have to reach out, be vulnerable, stay in contact, meet new people, learn to be flexible, forgive others, be open-minded. And you already know all of that. But if the anxiety is holding you back, really start to say, okay, what do I do about that? Because ultimately, you're going to have to embrace the anxiety, right? You're going to have to willingly do what you dread, and you're going to have to face your fears, not try to just circumvent them or try to get around them and not experience it, right? Because it's that safety behavior that really exacerbates some of the social anxiety. And so here's a few steps that we're going to talk through about how to deepen relationships and eventually overcome the anxiety. But how do you deepen relationships? And essentially, if I think about that, it's really about shared experiences over time, right? If you know anybody and have created any sort of relationships or friendships, it's these requirements. It needs interactions, right? We need to have this experience together. And then over time, we start to get to know somebody. They start to get to know us. We start to like them. Then we start to get to trust them, right? And that's how we deepen relationships. So we need to know enough people and then start to filter and funnel those down, which is why our first step throughout this process is starting to map out what our social network looks like. And if you're looking at this image, you're going to see in the center, right, that is like how well or someone knows me, how well I trust them, right? That's the depth of my relationship. And if you think about this, it's sort of like a funnel. We start to get to know people, and then again, it goes into we like them and then we trust them. So what I would first want you to do is just start to map out your current network, right? Who's anyone and everyone that you know and you're connected to, right? So I might put in my internal tiers, maybe that's my wife or my mom, right? Or a friend that's known me for a really long time. So those might be more close to the center, and then we start to work our way out. You can also map different organizations that you're a part of here as well. So even if it's like, man, I can't write every single person that is a part of my work, maybe there's a few individuals, but there's also, just this social institution or your office that you're connected as well. So what you'd first want to do again is just splatter every single person that comes to mind that you're already connected to. And then we're going to start to look at and start to develop goals for deepening and widening your relationships. Essentially, if we're talking about deepening, this is really marking from your map the relationships that you want to invest in. So these are basically saying, hey, I'm going to be reaching out to these people. I want to start to connect with them further. For widening, right? Because if we're saying, hey, some of this is in this funnel, it's a law of statistics. Every X amount of people I meet, I might like them, but also I might not like them and they might not like me, right? So we need to have a numbers game here too. And that's where we're talking about widening or sort of the breadth of developing relationships. And I think about one of my good buddies, Jack, and he, for especially in the early part of his career, was in the fashion industry, which really involved him moving a lot. So, he had to move to Boston or San Francisco or now Texas, right? So he had to move all over the country. And he told me this strategy that I thought was really brilliant. He basically said that when he moves to a new city, he tries to plug into 3 different areas. So one was a church, the other one was his rugby club, and the other one was his local bar. And basically said, hey, I'm going to find these 3 things and I'm just going to go to it. I'm going to meet people, develop those connections. So this is where we're talking about basically for you is to think about, who do I need to deepen my relationships with? What do I want to invest in? And how do I start to plug in and get involved with something so that I can start to meet more people and eventually get that shared experience and have time with them. And then that's when, in this process, you're going to start to gradually expose yourself to these social anxiety inducing situations. But you're going to do that while challenging the negative or irrational beliefs and thoughts. So you're going to create a goal that says, hey, maybe I'm going to go to this friend or I'm going to go to this event, right? And so, if I was like invited to a pool party, I'm going to say, okay, so my job is my goal is to go to this party. And then I'm going to start to identify and understand the resistance that's coming in, right? So I'm not willing to go swimming because, I don't want them to see me in a bathing suit, for example. Or I am wanting to have a conversation with a person, but I don't know how to start a conversation. And this is where, if we're identifying and really sort of listening to the resistance, it's not just negating every single thought that you have. Again, let me pick on this starting a new conversation. It might be that I need to get better at initiating conversations, right? So instead of just saying, nope, I'm perfectly fine, no anxiety is necessary, and let me just go do it, which again, that'd be nice if that was how it worked. But we can say, I need to develop some skills or some strategies for how do I open a conversation, right? Do I ask open-ended questions? Do I start with a observable compliment? How do I sustain or how do I exit those conversations as well? So I understand about the addressing the negative or irrational beliefs, but we also need to reality test that and say, hey, where do I need to improve or work on for some of these too? And ultimately, any one of these thoughts, we need to say, hey, how reasonable or rational is this? Of like, hey, everyone else is in a bathing suit too, and maybe everyone is going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. That's okay, right? And I can handle that, and then sort of go on. In summary, we know that the loneliness epidemic is really on the rise for young adults, both millennials and Gen Z. We also know that social anxiety disorder or social phobia is one of the number one contributors to this loneliness epidemic. It's more than any other mental health issue there is. And this is on the rise because we continually have abilities to basically have hyper self-conscious areas in our life. We use safety behavior for self-comfort, which makes us be able to withdraw and avoid some of these social situations in general. So we know the goal is to develop a lot of healthy, strong, bonded relationships. So how do we develop relationships? Is by shared experience over time. So you're going to have to meet people, you're going to have to talk with them. And if you're held back by social anxiety, our 3 steps are to map your social network, is to set some goals about deepening those relationships, what relationships you want to invest in, as well as how do you widen your relationships, get to know more people. I'm going to advocate about plugging in and getting involved in something. And then you're going to really engage with the resistance that you're experiencing, right? So all of the negative thoughts and feelings that are basically telling you not to go have that interaction. And then we want to assess those for where they're dysfunctional or irrational, as well as if are there any hints or insights to say, I should really be working on that in order to get to this point. And so guys, if you have questions on any of this process or any trends that you see that are really contributing to social anxiety or loneliness, I'd love to hear about it. Let's start a discussion in the comments below. Of course, feel free to like or subscribe to this video if you're interested in this type of content. You can also share this with someone else who needs it. And then of course, you can always continue this conversation. Check out our website. That's lifesketch.co. All right, thanks and catch you next time.